It was supposed to be just another quiet afternoon at Eagles Point Community Park. Kids laughed from the jungle gym, birds chirped overhead, and the sun bathed the playground in a warm, golden light. No one expected it to turn into something straight out of a nightmare. Hannah Mitchell certainly didn't. She'd brought her kids, Emily and Jason, for a break from the usual Sunday routine. Her daughter was 8 and fearless, already racing other kids up the slide backward. Jason, 6, a little more cautious, clutched a red toy truck as he trotted behind her. Hannah had found a spot on a bench near the monkey bars, papers from her 8th grade English class stacked beside her, red pen in hand. Life wasn't perfect, but it was calm, predictable, safe. At least it had been, until the first low rumble crawled across the pavement like a storm warning. At first she didn't think much of it. A motorcycle, maybe 2. Normal enough, but then came more. Louder, heavier. It wasn't the sound of a joyride. It was deliberate, a pack, and with it a sudden tension in the air, like nature itself sensed what was coming. Hannah looked up. 7 motorcycles pulled into the lot, chrome glinting in the sun, riders dressed in worn leather vests that bore the unmistakable blood-red emblem of a snarling wolf. The Red Wolves MC, the same outlaw biker gang that had been making headlines in neighboring counties for extortion, assault, and worse. No one ever saw them just hanging out. When they showed up, it was for a reason, and it was never good. Conversation stopped. Parents who had been chatting near the picnic tables fell silent. Eyes darted toward the lot, then back to their children. One mother scooped up her toddler and walked briskly toward her minivan. Another grabbed her teenage son's wrist, muttering, "We're leaving." Now. The energy in the park shifted instantly. The Red Wolves didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence said enough. They parked with precision, forming a semicircle. One rider, bigger than the rest, his vest bearing a patch that read President, dismounted and removed his helmet. His name was Kane Thompson, and even if Hannah hadn't known it, everything about the way he moved told her he was the one in charge. He had the calm swagger of a man who had never heard the word no and didn't plan to start today. Hannah's instincts kicked in. She stood up slowly, eyes searching for her kids. Emily had stopped playing, holding Jason's hand now as they both looked toward the intruders. Hannah called them quietly. "Come here, now." The kids didn't argue. They hurried to her side, Emily's boldness replaced by confusion and fear. Hannah put a hand on each of their shoulders, calm, steady. She couldn't show fear, not yet. Kane started walking, not fast, but with purpose. Another biker, taller and leaner, with sharp eyes and a cruel smile, peeled off from the group and flanked him, Reaper, his second in command. Hannah had read about him, veteran, dishonorably discharged, and a reputation for settling things with fists before words. They made their way across the gravel path, boots crunching, closing the distance between them and the playground, like wolves approaching a deer that hadn't decided whether to run or fight. But Hannah wasn't prey. She didn't run. "Well," Kane said, voice low, almost friendly, but the kind of friendly that makes your skin crawl. "What do we have here? Teacher, right? Eagles Point Middle?" He looked her up and down like he already knew the answer. "Thought so. We've heard good things." Hannah didn't flinch. "We were just leaving." "That's so?" Kane replied, raising an eyebrow. "Shame. You're just the kind of person we came to talk to. Community-minded, respected. You know how it is. Times are tough. Folks need a little extra protection these days." Hannah's grip tightened on her kids. "The park is safe. We don't need protection." "Oh, I disagree," Reaper said, stepping to her side and glancing at Emily. "Accidents happen. Broken glass in the sandbox, stray dogs, bad people." His eyes locked on Hannah's. "It's better when someone's watching out." She stepped slightly in front of her children. "If you have a concern about safety, take it to Chief Wilson." Kane laughed, not bothering to hide the mockery in his voice. "Wilson, that old man couldn't protect a cup of coffee from going cold." He took a step closer, his voice dropping lower. We're offering a real solution, something reliable, and all it takes is a small monthly contribution. 2,000, Reaper added casually, like it was the going rate for milk and bread. We give teachers a discount. Hannah felt her heart hammering in her chest, but forced herself to breathe. She knew what this was: extortion dressed up as neighborhood concern. They were trying to frighten her, to make her feel powerless. But what they didn't know was that she'd grown up watching someone who never backed down. Someone who trained for moments like this. Her brother, James. And if they thought she was going to fold just because a few bikers said scary things, they'd chosen the wrong woman to lean on. I don't make that kind of decision, she said carefully, buying time. You'll have to talk to the school board. We're not talking about the school, Kane said. We're talking about you, your safety, your kids' safety. The meaning hung in the air like a knife. That's when she knew they weren't going to leave. Not without making their point, not without scaring her, but they had no idea what she'd just done. They didn't see her slip her hand into her purse. They didn't hear the soft tap of her fingers unlocking a hidden code on her phone. They didn't know a Navy SEAL was already headed their way, and by the time they did, it would be far too late. 3 quick taps. Pause. 2 more. It was a simple code, one that looked like an accidental pocket press to anyone watching, but it was anything but accidental. That sequence, 3 taps, pause, 2, was a direct signal, silent, immediate. It bypassed normal messaging apps and connected to a secure line, encrypted and routed through protocols few people in the world had access to. And only one man on the receiving end, Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell, her brother. At that moment, James was over 300 miles away, standing under the relentless desert sun at a high-level military training facility. His face, weathered from years of missions in places most people had never heard of, remained impassive as he monitored the obstacle course before him. A group of elite candidates were halfway through a tactical simulation when he felt it, a sharp vibration on his side. Not his phone, his real comm device, the one linked to only one emergency contact, Hannah. He glanced down. The signal was unmistakable. Distress code, level 1, family in imminent danger. His body reacted before his mind had even finished processing. He turned to his second in command, Martinez. Take over, he said simply. Family emergency. That was all it took. Martinez didn't ask questions. You didn't question Mitchell when he used that tone. Within minutes, James was in motion. His go-bag was already packed. It always was. Years of service had trained him to expect the unexpected. What took others an hour, he could do in 4 minutes flat. He slid into his black SUV, a modified vehicle that looked civilian but had the engine of a predator. As he peeled out of the base, his mind wasn't on the road. It was already 10 steps ahead, running assessments, pulling data, connecting dots. He opened a secure channel on his dash console and started digging. The Red Wolves Motorcycle Club. He'd heard whispers, seen them pop up in reports from Homeland Security and interagency task forces. Small-time gang that suddenly had big-time money and coordination. Too organized, too well-armed. Something wasn't adding up. He ran a quick search and froze when he saw the latest intel. Eagles Point had been flagged. Expansion underway, the note read. Code for they were moving in on new turf. And now they'd picked his sister's park to make a statement. He hit another secure button. Wilson, this is Mitchell, James. I need a sit rep on the Red Wolves. There was a pause. Then a voice crackled through, old, worn, but steady. Chief Wilson, local PD. Commander Mitchell? Yeah, I figured you'd be calling soon. Your sister's tough. She didn't flinch. But those guys? They're bad news. They've been leaning on business owners all over town. I thought we had more time. James didn't hesitate. You don't. I'll be there in 3 hours. Get me Rivera. She's still running point on organized crime? Affirmative, Wilson said. I'll loop her in. And just like that, the operation began. Back in Eagles Point, Hannah sat on her living room couch, watching her kids watch cartoons in silence. Emily clutched a blanket, eyes glazed, pretending to be focused. Jason sat too close to her, hand twitching at the hem of his shirt, still wearing the same expression he had when Kane looked at him in the park. That look, a blend of confusion and fear, too big for a 6-year-old's heart. Her phone buzzed. "We're gone." "You're home?" She typed back quickly. "Yes, kids are scared." Seconds later, a reply. "Stay put. I'm coming." That was all she needed. She didn't know how James would get there. She just knew he would, because that's who he was. When their father passed, James had been the one to hold the family together. When she divorced her abusive ex, it was James who showed up in court, in uniform, and stood behind her without saying a word. Presence alone was enough. And now that same presence was heading to Eagles Point with a purpose. God help whoever got in his way. As the miles flew by beneath his tires, James pulled in intel from satellite pings, intercepted chatter, and old military dossiers. The Red Wolves weren't acting alone. Their sudden rise in resources, firepower, and coordination didn't come from selling meth or running guns. No, someone else was backing them, someone smarter, richer, hidden. And they'd made one critical mistake. They made this personal. He sent encrypted messages to 2 of his old SEAL teammates, Calloway and Ginn. No details, just one phrase: Eagles Point, Red Wolves, family. The replies came back almost instantly. "On my way." That's all it took. By the time James crossed the state line, he had a mental map of every alley, exit route, and known Red Wolves' hangout in town. He muted his phone and tapped into a low-band police scanner. Movement confirmed. 3 riders stationed near his sister's house, watching, waiting, making good on Kane's threat. But they weren't ready for what was coming. James killed the engine a block away and rolled the SUV into a side alley. From there, he moved like a shadow, silent, efficient. He counted the angles, studied the rhythm of their posture, the direction of their attention. Then, like a breeze through dry grass, he was on them. The first never even saw him. A sharp strike to the side of the neck, precise and clean, dropped him like a puppet with cut strings. The second turned, confused only to have a pressure lock around his throat, tight, quiet, controlled. 8 seconds later, unconscious, the third, young, inexperienced, saw just enough to panic. He fumbled for his phone, heart racing, mouth open to yell. James was already behind him. "Don't!" The word came like steel wrapped in silk. Calm, deadly. The kid froze. Who are you?" James stepped into the light just enough to show his eyes. "The woman you're watching? She's my sister. Now listen closely, because you're going to deliver a message for me, word for word." He told him exactly what to say. No flair, no threats. Just cold, honest reality. You picked the wrong target. You have 1 hour to get out of Eagles Point. After that, I start hunting. He zip-tied the kid's unconscious friends and watched as the remaining biker tore off into the night, tires screeching, eyes wide with something his gang hadn't felt in a long time: fear. Only then did James walk up to Hannah's porch. She opened the door before he knocked, eyes already welling with tears of relief. She hugged him like someone who'd been holding her breath all day. "They were here," she whispered. "I know," he said, hugging her back. "They won't be again." And as they stood there, the night around them held its breath, because something was about to shift in Eagles Point. A reckoning was coming, and it had just arrived in boots and silence. Morning came to Eagles Point, but it didn't bring peace. The sun rose like any other day, casting long shadows across the quiet streets and warming the cracked sidewalks that wound through neighborhoods where people kept their heads down and their mouths shut. But today, that silence didn't mean calm. It meant fear. Rumors had already started spreading like wildfire. Someone had stood up to the Red Wolves at the park. A single mom, no less. Some said she shouted them down. Others whispered she had family in the military. Either way, it didn't matter. The gang was angry, and angry men in leather didn't tend to sit around and think before they acted. The Red Wolves didn't disappear after the park. No, they doubled down. By mid-morning, their presence had gone from bold to aggressive. They weren't just patrolling, they were prowling. Engines echoed through the streets like warning sirens. 2 bikes parked outside the local diner, the riders leaning against the glass just long enough to make every customer inside finish their coffee early and skip lunch. At the gas station, a trio of them loitered by the pumps without ever fueling up, watching people with eyes that said, "We own this town now." By noon, shopkeepers were closing early. Teachers were calling in sick, and Chief Wilson's already overstretched police department had gone from managing parking tickets to trying to keep people from locking their own doors in fear. And at the center of it all, the whispers. The Red Wolves are looking for someone. They're sending a message. That mom from the park? They're not letting that go. Most didn't know her name, but they knew she'd said no. And the gang couldn't afford for no to catch on. What the town didn't know, what the Red Wolves certainly didn't know, was that the woman they were trying to intimidate had already brought a storm to their doorstep. James Mitchell wasn't a man who just reacted. He planned, moved like water, silent until it was time to strike. And now, with boots on the ground and intel flooding in, he was doing what he did best, preparing for a war nobody else saw coming. He spent the morning watching, mapping. He knew their patterns better than they did. He saw where they parked, who they talked to, where their weak spots were. They weren't careful. They were cocky. They'd built their reputation on fear, and fear had a way of making people obedient. But it also made them predictable. By late afternoon, James was already speaking with Chief Wilson and Detective Rivera, using backdoor comms and encrypted files that would have taken the department months to access. Rivera was sharp, young but seasoned, and skeptical at first, until she saw the way James laid out the Red Wolves' movement like a chessboard. She pulled up her own files: property pressure, forced closures, escalating patterns of intimidation. But none of it made sense for a gang their size, not unless someone was helping them. "They're organized," she said, "but not street smart. They're executing someone else's plan." James nodded. "That's the part that worries me." As night began to fall again, the temperature dropped, but the tension didn't. Lights in the town dimmed earlier than usual, curtains drawn, locks checked twice. It wasn't the kind of fear that shouted. It whispered. It watched. And Hannah could feel it. Even with James nearby, she sensed it. The tightening grip, the way the air itself felt different. Emily had barely spoken since the park. Jason kept asking if the loud men were coming back. She told them no. She told them everything was fine. But she kept one hand on her phone the whole time. Meanwhile, James had moved into the shadows again. He wasn't staying with them. He couldn't. Not while the Red Wolves were circling like wolves who thought they smelled blood. He chose an abandoned workshop down the street, a place with old security cameras and only one exit. He turned it into a temporary outpost, bringing in tools from his SUV that looked more like they belonged in a military ops center than a small-town garage. Maps, comms gear, intel sheets, patterns. Then came movement. A black motorcycle returned to the neighborhood around 8 p.m., this time slower, deliberate. The rider didn't stop, but he didn't need to. He passed Hannah's house twice, lights off, engine low, message sent. But what the Red Wolves didn't realize was that every time they made a move, James made two. By the time that rider looped around for the third pass, his license plate had already been run through an off-grid database. His name, history, affiliations, all logged. A network of former military operatives, now working private security or intelligence, were already on alert. Some were former teammates. Others owed James favors. None asked for details. They just asked where to land. That night, the last calm moment passed without notice. No sirens, no warnings. Just the hum of a town trying to hold itself together under the weight of something it couldn't quite name. But change was already on the wind. And in a world where people like Kane Thompson believed muscle and intimidation ruled the day, Something far more dangerous had quietly entered their territory. A man who didn't bluff, a soldier with no patience for threats, a brother who'd crossed continents to answer a signal, and now he was ready. Kane Thompson stood in the center of the Red Wolves clubhouse, a beer bottle sweating in his hand. The rest of his crew sprawled across couches and bar stools around him. The air smelled like old leather, gasoline, and tension. The younger members were laughing too loud, trying to hide the unease that had crept in since the park incident. But Kane wasn't laughing. He hadn't laughed since that prospect came flying into the lot on his bike, white as a ghost, stammering something about a guy who'd taken out his crew without breaking a sweat. At first, Kane brushed it off. Every gang had its ghosts, urban legends spun from bravado and half-true war stories. But this one felt different. He looked into the kid's eyes, saw the way his hands shook, and knew something real had rattled him. Then came the name, Mitchell, and it hit harder than any punch. Reaper was the one who confirmed it. Dug into military channels he still had access to. Not just James Mitchell, Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell, former Team 6, decorated, cleared for operations even most generals didn't know existed. Reaper brought the file in like it was radioactive. "We didn't just kick a hornet's nest," he said. "We blew up the whole damn hive." Kane read the dossier in silence, jaw clenched. He felt the room shrink. Suddenly, all the power they thought they had, all the fear they'd built in this town, seemed paper-thin. Still, he couldn't back down. Not now. If he ran, the other chapters would smell weakness. If he bowed to one man, he'd lose everything he'd clawed to build. So he did what he always did when the walls closed in. He doubled down. "Call everyone," he said to Reaper. "Full chapter. Any prospect who wants their patch, tell him to get here. We're not running." But even as he barked orders, something gnawed at the back of his mind. It wasn't just Mitchell. It was the timing, the heat, the way the town was reacting. People weren't scared the way they used to be. They were quiet, sure, cautious. But he'd seen something else too, resolve. Not the kind that came from courage, but from desperation. The kind of resolve that turns regular people into something dangerous. That night, as his riders gathered, the clubhouse filled with noise and steel and the smell of exhaust, but Kane couldn't shake the feeling that they were the ones being watched now, not the other way around. Meanwhile, James was assembling his own force, but not with noise or numbers, with precision, with trust. Rivera had opened doors for him, access to case files, reports, patterns that painted a different picture of the Red Wolves' rise. They weren't just growing, they were being helped. Businesses around town had been quietly sold off, sometimes under duress. Others were simply abandoned, bought up by shell companies with offshore accounts. Someone had been laying groundwork. The Red Wolves were just the bulldozers. James followed the trail, and it led somewhere strange. A block of properties around the industrial district, old warehouses, storage units, and a section of Eagles Point that nobody paid much attention to. But now, construction equipment had been moved in. New fencing, security cameras disguised as broken floodlights. It wasn't gang territory, it was a staging area. He recognized the signs immediately. It looked exactly like a forward base from a covert op. Controlled access, disguised logistics, quiet power feeds. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to keep this off the radar. But why here? That question kept him up until 3 a.m., poring over maps and old records. And then, buried in county archives, he found it, an old mining survey from the 1940s. Eagles Point had once been considered for military use. There were geological anomalies under the industrial zone. A failed Cold War-era project called Site Echo, decommissioned. Supposedly. James cross-referenced that with Rivera's property data. The Red Wolves hadn't just been causing chaos. They were pushing people off land that happened to sit directly over old tunnels and forgotten vaults. Someone needed access. Someone needed silence. The gang was just the smokescreen. He reported this to Rivera, who immediately turned pale. "You're saying there's something buried under Eagles Point?" "I'm saying someone's willing to move heaven and earth to get to it," James replied. They didn't know what was down there, not yet, but it wasn't gold or oil, not with this level of secrecy. Whatever it wasn't meant to be found. At the same time, people across town were beginning to notice the shift. It wasn't just that the Red Wolves were suddenly more aggressive. It was how targeted everything had become. Power outages near certain blocks. Construction permits pushed through without public record. Surveillance vans that didn't belong to any local utility. One man even reported hearing drilling sounds late at night, but not from any normal rig. Deeper, rhythmic, mechanical, something beneath the surface. James returned to the workshop, his mind racing. If the Red Wolves were acting as muscle, then someone else was pulling the strings. Someone with enough reach to buy silence, control logistics, and deploy intimidation with surgical precision. He opened his secured laptop, accessed a classified military channel, and searched for any references to Site Echo. What came back wasn't much, but it was enough. The project had been sealed in 1948. The reason? Unspecified containment failure. All personnel records redacted, location buried, but not erased. Eagles Point was never just a random target. It was chosen, and now, whatever had been hidden all those years ago, someone wanted it unearthed. James leaned back in his chair, the pieces forming faster than he could track. The gang, the shell companies, the sudden infrastructure changes, the hidden base, all of it pointed to something bigger. The kind of operation that didn't just bend the law. It erased it. And if the Red Wolves had been helping unlock a buried secret under Eagles Point, then they weren't just a threat to his sister anymore. They were a threat to everyone. Night had fully settled over Eagles Point, but the darkness didn't bring quiet. The hum of engines was everywhere, throaty and deep, the kind that sent vibrations through the pavement. 30 bikes, maybe more, converged on the clubhouse. They came from surrounding towns, answering Kane Thompson's call for strength. Prospect jackets, full patches. Some wore masks, others had war paint on their faces. It wasn't just a show of unity, it was a declaration to the town, to the cops, to Mitchell. We own this place. Step aside or get steamrolled. But Kane wasn't celebrating. He stood inside his office, door closed, fists resting on the cluttered desk, eyes locked on the dark monitor in front of him. A flickering surveillance feed showed his men assembling, posturing, but his gut twisted anyway. There was a storm brewing, and he wasn't sure if they were riding into it or if it was coming for them. James Mitchell had gone quiet. Too quiet. No threats, no warnings. Just that message through the prospect. You've got 1 hour to get out of town. After that, I start hunting. That message echoed louder than any exhaust pipe. Still, he played the part. He stepped outside, surveyed his army, gave the usual speech. They think they can scare us, that one man can undo what we built, but they don't know us. They don't know how deep we run. The men roared, fists in the air. A mob hungry for confrontation. But behind Kane's eyes, doubt crept in like water under a locked door. Across town, the real preparation was happening. Quiet, efficient, surgical. James Mitchell sat inside a borrowed room at the local police station turned makeshift command center. He wasn't just watching biker movements. He was tracking vehicles, drones, signals. His team, former SEALs, now ghost operatives, were in place. They had slipped into Eagles Point unnoticed, embedding themselves in alleyways, rooftops, and shadows. Not a single man among them wore a uniform. They didn't need to. Their reputation was stitched into the silence they moved through. But this wasn't just about Kane anymore. Rivera had finally pulled it together. The files, the maps, the acquisitions. They weren't random. Every property the Red Wolves had pressured, every shop they vandalized, every house they made an example of. It all surrounded one area, the industrial district, and beneath it, the remains of Site Echo. Old government maps showed a tunnel system buried beneath the factories, a sealed vault, radiation testing markers. One file had even been blacked out by 3 separate federal agencies. Rivera's hands shook as she flipped through it. "They're not looking for something down there," she said. "They know what's down there. They're digging it out." James stood, eyes locked on the pinpoints on the digital map. "Then they've made a bigger mistake than threatening my sister." At that same moment, movement lit up one of the surveillance monitors. A convoy of unmarked vans, clean, black, armored, rolled into the industrial zone. No gang insignias, no biker jackets, just suits, military haircuts, tactical vests that didn't exist in any budget request, men who didn't talk unless it was in code. James recognized the pattern immediately. Private contractors, government adjacent, the kind of people who weren't accountable to anyone but the highest bidder, and they weren't here to protect the town. They were here to make sure whatever came out of the ground didn't leave witnesses behind. Back at Hannah's house, Emily finally slept. Jason curled against her, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. Hannah sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone, waiting for it to buzz again. She didn't know what was happening across town. She didn't know about the black vans or the strange energy readings coming out of the tunnels. She just knew James had promised to keep them safe, and when James made a promise, the world itself bent to honor it. But even James hadn't expected what they found next. An intercepted comm signal between two of the contractors confirmed it. They weren't just excavating. They were hours away from extraction, and what they were extracting wasn't a weapon. It was something older, something that predated the town, maybe even the country, buried beneath the earth in reinforced metal chambers layered in lead and secrecy, the kind of thing governments used to hide when they thought people still believed in monsters. The worst part? Whatever it was, it had started to activate. Strange readings had begun spiking. Heat, magnetism, even mild seismic tremors. The vault they'd breached wasn't just opening, it was responding. Rivera read the last decoded file aloud. Project Echo, Phase 3 Protocol, Containment Breach, Initiate Zero Protocol, Complete erasure of site and all surrounding evidence. She looked up, her face pale. "They're going to wipe the town." James's voice was ice. "Not if we stop them first." Plans moved fast after that. The townspeople, once afraid, now furious. Sarah Chen from the hardware store stepped up, distributing tools, radios, even food. Mike Parker, the old maintenance supervisor, revealed the utility blueprints of the entire town. Underground paths, crawl spaces, hidden junctions that hadn't seen use since the 60s, routes the Red Wolves didn't know about. It wasn't just a tactical operation anymore, it was a resistance. James split the groups. Former SEALs took the lead through the industrial tunnels. Sarah's brother, an ex-Marine, led a defense perimeter near the western access points. Rivera coordinated the chaos from the station. Every alley, every rooftop, every street corner had eyes. Not police, not soldiers, civilians who were done being afraid. Then came the breach. 2:03 a.m. A low-frequency pulse rocked the industrial district. Lights flickered, phones died, radios snapped with static. The ground beneath Eagles Point trembled. Something in the vault had woken up, and it wasn't going back to sleep. James and his squad moved like ghosts through the tunnel. They reached the chamber first. The drilling rig was still there, but twisted, warped. The air shimmered around it like heat rising from asphalt, and in the center of the room something massive stood, part machine, part something else. It pulsed, not visually, not physically, but something in their bones felt it. They weren't just dealing with a cover-up anymore. They were dealing with something alive. Then came the orders. Through distorted comms, they intercepted Black Site Command issuing the kill code. Initiate Protocol 0. Erase it all. The town, the people, the machine. No survivors. James stared at the device. He had one chance, one shot, not to destroy it, but to stop it from spreading. He reached into his bag, pulled out a compact EMP unit, custom-built, off-record, military grade. He attached it to the rig's main control board. His voice came through the final comm channel, calm, focused. "Tell them Protocol 0's been cancelled. Eagles Point stands." Then he flipped the switch. The EMP burst rocked the rig. Sparks flew. The pulse cascaded outward, slamming through the room like a wave. Lights died, monitors blinked out, and the thing at the center screamed, not in sound, in pressure, in gravity. The chamber buckled, but then stillness. Outside, the red wolves scattered, disoriented, broken. Some dropped their bikes. Others simply ran. Whatever they thought they were part of, it was gone. Their handlers had abandoned them. Their fearsome leader, Kane Thompson, sat slumped against a wall, broken, not from fists, but from truth. They weren't kings. They were pawns, and pawns get sacrificed. By morning, the contractors were gone. No vans, no suits, no cleanup crew, just a trail of dust on the highway. But Eagles Point remained, bruised, shaken, changed, but alive. And as the sun rose over the rooftops, painting gold across the quiet town, James Mitchell stood outside his sister's house, watching Emily and Jason chase each other across the lawn like nothing had happened. Hannah walked out with 2 mugs of coffee. She handed him one. "You're staying for a while." He didn't answer, he just nodded, because he wasn't done. He knew this wasn't over, not really. But for now, for today, Eagles Point was safe, and that was enough.